Everybody has an interesting story to tell. In a lot of cases, what someone thinks isn't interesting is interesting. It's just they've got to think about what's the context. I ended up losing my job in 1989. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. That's a whole story because
some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Okay, everybody. So what do skydiving, running marathons, attending Burning Man, and writing a best-selling thriller have in common? They're all items checked off the bucket list of someone who refuses to let age define adventure. Today, we're joined by a man who proves that the most dangerous phrase in Earth language might just be, "I'm too old for that." On our show, we celebrate the rebels, the risk takers, and the dreamers who transform the wildest ideas into reality. Our guest is living proof that sometimes the best stories come from those who've lived the most. So, without further ado, meet Buddy Howard, the 67-year-old kid who just launched his debut novel straight into Amazon's top 100. Buddy Howard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Danielle. It's a pleasure to be here. You got a great podcast, and I've really enjoyed listening to them. So I'm honored to be on this. I really am. Thank you.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. You're very sweet, it's flattering, but we're honored to have you as well. The things that you've accomplished are very inspiring and very exciting too, because I don't think a lot of people listening have done half the things that you've done. So it's going to be a really cool conversation. So yeah, let's chat about you to start off with. I thought it was very interesting. You told me that you once brought a local stranger to breakfast every Monday for an entire year. And I think that that's a really cool way to start this conversation because I can only imagine that what you talked about during that time, it was about the same kind of life experiences that you put into the book itself. So would you chat a little bit about that and about the kind of kindness that you learned from it?
That is an amazing story, and I didn't know I told you that. I didn't know I'd even mentioned that.
I
So
might have gotten it from the book when I was looking through it.
you may have. Okay, so and I tend to be one of these people who's very transparent. I probably kind of um, uh, say too much, probably sometimes. I mean, I kind of over release, say probably more than I should sometimes, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. But I had in 2001, my then 11-year-old daughter developed an eating disorder. And we about lost her. She was struggling to the point that we had to admit her to a hospital up in Johns Hopkins up in Baltimore. And she struggled for about 5 years. She's doing great now. She's 35 years old. So this was a long time ago. But there was a day when she had been struggling so mightily for about 4.5 years. And she said something like, Danielle, it was crazy. She said something like, you know what? I think I'd like a banana.
Oh, wow.
And for us, that you could have told me I won the lottery, and that would have paled in comparison to where I was at that moment that I realized she was making a major inroad to recovery. And so I was on my way to a Biscuitville that day, and I got into the line, and I was just in such a great mood. I didn't know what to do, but it kind of came out where the person in front of me was in line. They ordered their breakfast. And I said, I'm just having a great day. Let me buy your breakfast. And they said, that is the nicest thing I've ever had. And I thought, for $5, that's the nicest thing. And they said, and I couldn't believe they said this. They said, you've restored my faith in humanity.
Oh, wow.
That's a really good deal for $5 to. I started thinking, I went to work that day and I just felt great. And I thought, what if I did that every day for, I mean, every week, 1 day a week, if I did that, $5, 50 weeks, 52 weeks, $200. What if I did that? What if I tried on, and what day do I do it? Well, Monday is like my least favorite day. So why don't I go to that Biscuitville every Monday and I'll buy somebody's breakfast? And that's what I did for an entire year. I would go and whoever was in line, I'd buy their breakfast. And, it was one of those situations where it was a little bit hard to do it because you feel intrusive with someone where they're standing in line getting ready to pay. And some people wondered if you were trying to do, sell them something or if you had something else you were trying to do. But that's kind of what went behind it. And I learned a lot about people from doing that. But it was one of those things, nobody didn't say thank you. And it was always one of those things that I went to work feeling, like I was just in a better mood because of it.
Right. Well, that's such a genuine and heartfelt experience that you went through and that you kept doing it. I mean, if there's any story that should tell people why they should read your book and learn more, that's the story. I mean, the kindness that comes from your heart there, that's incredible. And you're learning so much and impacting other lives. And who would have known just by that $5 breakfast?
Thank you. Well, thank you for
Yeah.
saying that.
So yeah, I mean, to transfer into the book a little bit then, well, first off, I know you have a copy of the book with you today. Can we shine a light on the cover design for a moment? I think it's a really
Yeah, sure.
compelling.
Can you see this okay?
Yeah, we can see it. Where did the
Yeah.
design work come from? What was it inspired by?
Yeah, I actually used a online service that uses people around the world. So it's a guy from Serbia, and I told him a little bit about the book, and I said, this takes place in Detroit. It involves a jury case, and so I've got the scale of justice as possibly a theme that would show up. There's a series of scenes where there are hikes through the woods. And so I said, I think this guy is going to be really struggling with some decisions. And I want to communicate something where in the cover where it shows a man deep in thought, maybe he's on a hike or something like that. And so I ended up taking about 3 or 4 iterations before he landed on this one. And this one just spoke to me. When I saw it, I thought, this guy looks like Paul Nelms, the main character who's in the book. And I thought, I love this. And so I ended up going with it. I tried it out with a few people and they said, we love it. So that was kind of how it came about.
Understood. Well, hey, it's a beautiful design, very compelling, and something that I think really gives a little hint as to what the book can kind of be about. It's very introspective and also inspirational.
Thank
So,
you.
so yeah, let's dive into, the content of the book itself. You said that this story originated from a single question that haunted you since 1977. What is that question and why did it stick with you for so long?
I sort of struggle a little bit with that one because it would give away a spoiler. But
Oh, oh, okay.
there was something that happened to me at Wake Forest where I went to school, college, and I saw something and I thought that is a fascinating situation if something happened when this was taking place from a legal standpoint.
Mm,
And it made me think a little bit about what would happen legally if this actually took place. And so that was really what sort of gelled in my head for many, many years. And I had always wanted to write a book. I had probably at age 20, 25, made a bucket list and put things like skydiving on there and some other things like that. And writing a book was one. And so I wasn't ever positive if I would write something that'd be nonfiction or if I would write fiction. And what I ended up loving about fiction was that it's almost like painting on a blank canvas. You can do anything that you want. And one of the writers that I really like is Stephen King, and he has a book on writing, and it's called On Writing. And he has a quote in there that says something to the effect of, I love to put characters in impossible situations and then just see what they'll do. And that's kind of what I did with this book. So these characters almost wrote the book as I started writing it. I felt like they would do certain things and I'd go, Paul, why did you do that? And then all of a sudden I'd be writing how they get out of it. But that's kind of the process that I went through to get to it.
Understood. So I'm sorry to almost reveal a spoiler, but I think you did a good job of working around that while also keeping things very interesting.
I should have cued you into that. I'm sorry. I hope that wasn't rude of me to say.
That was perfect though. I think you did a great job of, kind of introducing everything and giving us a good idea for what's to be expected. And um so let's dive a little bit into more of this then and the central theme without,
Yeah,
giving it away.
yeah,
Um there's a struggle between conscience and consequence. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How do you see
yeah.
this playing out in the
Sure.
daily lives besides what happens in your novel?
Absolutely. And I'll give you sort of a summary of what it's about. The main character is a guy named Paul Nelms. He's a writer. The setting is Detroit. And the setting is in Detroit because Detroit, to me, has always been a city that's kind of in transition. It's one of these ones that's a little bit of a city that has a lot of potential, but has had challenges. So it was the largest city that ever went into bankruptcy in 2013. And so it's had its share of challenges. Well, Paul, the main character, ends up with his share of challenges too. And in the same way that the city of Detroit is recovering for much of this period in the teens to the early 1920s, let's say. In the same way, Paul Nelms is developing as a person in that time period too. So there's a little bit of a corollary between the two. But Paul is a writer and he's married to a woman named Catherine. And Catherine comes home one night and she's been assaulted and she doesn't disclose all the details to Paul. But the one thing she says is, I'm not going to the police. And he struggles much like I would as a husband or many other husbands out there would. And you struggle with, do I take matters into my own hands? I mean, that's what you think about oftentimes as a husband. I'm protecting my family. I'm protecting the woman I love. And he does that. He ends up finding the attacker and takes matters into his own hands, and it backfires. And the more he tries to extricate himself from this situation, the worse it gets, and the less he can extricate himself, and the stakes continue to go up to the point at the end of the book, it's or close to the end of the book, he really has to make this decision between conscience and consequence. He's got a situation where he can do one thing and it's going to serve him well, or he can do the right thing that has tons of risk and it may cost him everything. And he has to decide what he's going to do. And I loved writing that because as I was writing this, I stopped many times and thought, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I struggled with it myself, and I've had other people say, I wasn't sure what would do in this situation. And that really is kind of the heart of the novel. There is also a kind of a whodunit that doesn't get relieved until the last page. So if people like, I mean, the people who like my book the best are people who like twists and turns that are not expected, where you're going down one road and then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, I didn't see that coming. This
Right.
this book's got a lot of that because I enjoy just putting those in there. And there's just a lot of twist. And then some people say it's a little bit of a surprise ending. And to me, I just absolutely love hearing those comments because for me, that's an indication that they really enjoyed it.
Right, understood. Well, hey, it definitely seems like something that keeps people on their toes. It keeps people interested in wanting to know more. So to talk about the writing process then, what kind of strategies did you use to really engage people in that way and to keep them hungry for what's next?
I did a lot of editing, and so I wrote this book over. I said eight. It's probably closer to 10, And I would write, and then sometimes I would take a break for a couple of months, 2, 3 months, and then pick it back up. And then I would think, oh, you know what I need to do is add this character and, have this occur in the plot. And so I would kind of develop it over time. And I had early in the process, I had a story editor, someone who was looking at pacing, looking at the plot, saying this is, it's moving a little slowly at this time. You need to sort of, edit out some of this material and change this and put this in. So I did that early on. And then I had 2 or 3 other editors who I worked with over the years. And they really helped me refine the writing, tighten the writing, increased action scenes that were in there that added a lot of activity. And I had one woman who said, one editor who I was working with, who said, the first chapter is a scene where the father, Paul, and his son are hiking. And that was an add-on chapter that I added about 6 months ago. And it ended up that I added it in for a very specific reason, and it was to sort of tie the end together so that it kind of resolves some challenges that Paul, the main character, has. But I really tried to listen to my beta readers. I would let people read it as I worked on it. And I would say for any reader who's out, I mean, any writer who's out there, that was to me invaluable because I would hear from somebody, this didn't quite seem believable, or I like this part. And so that really, really helped me as much as anything.
Understood. Yeah, yeah. So really you need to have people on your side and on your team is what I'm getting from this. It's not
Yeah.
just something you can do on your own and just start writing. You need editors, you need people to give you feedback because at the end of the day, it might look great on from one end, but when you have a second pair of eyes on it, there's so much more to improve. Did you encounter any struggles throughout the editing process? Anything that, you know,
Yeah. Here's an example, and it's exactly what you just said. You have 2 editors, and I had 2 at the same time, and they wouldn't always agree. You got one saying you need to build this up, another saying you need to kind of cut this back some. And it goes back to the realization that every reader is going to read it differently. And so one of the challenges was figuring out what to take and what not to take. So you're
Mm,
getting all this input, and you, as the author, as the ultimate decision maker, have to decide which of that advice you're going to take and what you're not going to take. And that's, I think, one of the challenges. The other challenge that I had candidly was I was so intent on having a great book and wanted it to be perfect, but perfect is the enemy of good, as they say. And so there were many times where I would sit there and I'd go, I need to work on this just a little bit more to kind of get it just a little better.
right.
And finally, I was having dinner. My wife and I were having dinner with some friends early this year. And we were talking about the manuscript. And the woman said, you know what you need is a deadline. And she said, yours is July 4th. And it
Okay.
was like March that this dinner is having. So I said, March, July 4th. Okay. So it gave me about 3.5 months. And so I would see her or see them as a couple in the next couple of months. And she would always say July 4th. And so I uploaded the draft to Amazon on July 3rd. So a lot of times for me, if I've got a big project and it's something that I really want to get done, I often benefit by having either my own deadline or get someone else to give me a deadline and then hold me accountable and then come back and say, how are you doing on this? Have you made progress on it? So that was one of the things that I did was I would share with people my plans. And the other thing that I did that was had a pretty big impact on my making progress is I would in the mornings a lot of times say 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock is when I'm going to write, get me a cup of coffee to kind of get my head going. And then I'd say 300 words. That's the minimum. If you can write 300 words, then you can do whatever you want after that. And a lot of times what would happen, I'd write 300, but by then I'd be getting my cadence and I could kind of go on and maybe I'd write 500 that day. But that was when I saw probably the most progress made. And the hard part for me is you'll struggle. I will struggle with a line and end up going, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. And then you
Right.
change the plot and then you go, well, I can't use that. So you end up filing it away for something else. But but that's part of the challenge of coming up with something that you end up liking at the end.
Understood. So I think the most important thing we could take away from that is the idea of setting a deadline, right? Because so many people say, I'm going to write that book, I'm working on it, it's coming. But when you're actually going to get that publication date, so setting that deadline, making yourself work toward it, I think that's the first step. That's just incredible. And everything you've said to follow up after that, it definitely goes into play to making sure you actually meet that deadline. No excuses, make sure you get up early and just in that way, here you go. I mean, how else did you have that poster on in the background right there unless you set that deadline and got to work on it?
That's right. Yeah. And for me, especially if I've got a big project, I will sometimes break it up into pieces so that I know how I'm progressing as I'm making my way toward that deadline. And so I mean, I do that too. I didn't do that a ton in this case because I had enough done on the book at that stage that I knew I could probably wrap it up. But when I'm doing something like that with a deadline and I'm earlier in the process, I find that having many deadlines before then that get you on the road to be able to not panic at the last day and say, well, I haven't done it, really helps me as well.
Understood. Right. No, and that's something we should definitely be keeping in mind also. Um, so we have all this out here, an amazing, compelling book and all these writing tips, but what's next for you, buddy? Have you considered writing any other books or taking on any other projects? What can we be looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, I would love to write a sequel. I've had a lot of people talk about a sequel, and there are a couple of um, characters that you don't quite know exactly what happened to at the end of the book. And I've thought about bringing them back and having a sequel. I've had a number of people who've said they could really see this being a movie. I'd love to think about whether or not I'd ever want to try to convert it to a script and then
Mm.
try to submit it for, for possible, movie production. But I, I, I'm probably more likely to write another book before I would try that, I think. And my guess is it would be some kind of a sequel to this one.
Okay, well, that's really exciting to know. And I mean, if anybody's really hooked by the burden of evidence, well, of course, they want to know what's going to happen next. So
Well,
amazing stuff. But where can people go to get connected with you and to stay up to date as to when that might happen, or even just to follow along with your journey? Do you have a social media
sure. Thank you
website?
for asking that. Yeah, they can go to buddyhoward.com. This is my website. And there's a place where you can register, just give your email address. I'll never, sell it or use it in a way that you don't want it to be used. But I would love to have, if people are open to this, I'd love to ask even their advice. As I'm writing a book, if I had people say they were interested in the book, I'd love to say, would you be more interested in this or this? And just have them participate in how it
Oh,
developed. Because they're the ones that are the judges. They're the important ones. They're the readers. They're the ones who I'm kind of reporting to. And so I would love that. So if they go there and the book can be bought, it's on Amazon. It's any bookstore that's out there should be able to order it if they don't have it in stock. I'm not a real well-known author, so not every bookstore is going to have it in stock, but just about any bookstore should be able to order it because it's available through the distributor that most bookstores use, but it's also available on Amazon, and there's a real good audio version of it. The Audible is a really good version, I think. The guy who reads it is just a great guy and has just a great voice. He did a terrific job with it.
right. Well, amazing stuff. And I really like that strategy, getting the audience's opinion on the writing. I mean, how else are you going to make sure that you're authentically reaching what they're looking for and, keeping up the excitement for it. So that's awesome. Guys, if you're listening today, we're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast so you can click on over and, get connected and stay in the know about that and share your thoughts for the next sequel as well. So as we begin, to sort of wrap up a little bit today, I have, just a follow-up question about, your journey and writing process. Everybody has a story worth telling. What would you say to somebody who thinks their story isn't interesting enough to share?
I would say everybody has an interesting story to tell. They may not realize it, but I will just tell you that they do. I've never met a person ever, and I'm 68 now. I've never met a person that didn't have something that happened that had meaning, that had struggle, where they overcame a struggle, where they were the underdog and yet they persevered and they triumphed. Uh, every one of those is a story worth telling. You sit there and think about Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. It's a book about a guy who catches a fish. That won the Pulitzer Prize in 1953 for fiction. So it it's in a lot of cases what someone thinks isn't interesting is interesting. It's just they've got to think about what's the context and what's something that other people have gone through, whether it's a struggle, whether it's a challenge that they overcame. You know, I ended up losing my job in 1989. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. That's a whole story because it launched my career starting a new business, and that business did well. That business allowed me to have a lot of flexibility when my youngest child, started to struggle with medical issues, and I was able to leave and go live in Baltimore for a while with them. And so, there's stories that everybody has. And, I even think about a quote that you had. I don't remember what interview you had, but it was something about where you were talking about how there were all these good things that had happened to you. And you said that the thing that was kind of the trigger, the thing that was the catalyst, was you were willing to try new things
Mm.
and you were willing to learn new skills. Well, that's a great story just right there. And so everybody's got things kind of like that are insights, that are life lessons. That what you just said in that interview that I just quoted you on. I mean, that's something like you would almost want to tattoo on people's heads because it's such a great life lesson. That is so true. And there are so many people who either they don't have a job, but you go back to the advice you gave. That's that's such a key thing. So I think everybody's got a story, and everybody's got a story worth telling.
Right. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for, quoting one of my past interviews. It's very
Oh, I
sweet of
loved it. I
you.
loved that quote. I remembered it and it stuck with me. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it directly applies to what you just said too. Everybody does have a story worth telling, and you just gotta, expand your reach and get out of your comfort zone a little bit. I think that directly relates to the burden of evidence as well. So, perfect way to tie things all up. Do you have any last bits of advice for the audience today? That anything they should take along with them on their writing journeys as they, get back to their
Yeah.
desk and start
I
writing?
think so. I think the one thing I did, and I've had this for probably 30 years now, I started a file on my computer, and the title of the file is just writing thoughts. And what I would do would be if I had a scene that came to mind that I thought this belongs in a book, I would just write it down. If I heard somebody turn a phrase and I just loved the way they said something, I would put it in there. And so it's a collection of just either scenes or characters or ideas that are all writing ideas. And it's probably, gosh, it's probably 100 pages of notes, but it's just a collection of stuff. But every now and then I'll go through and read over them and go, oh, I should use this here. And it really does help. For me, I end up going back over that and I'll think, oh, I could build a little side story based on this. And so that would be one thing I would recommend.
Okay, yeah, I like that. And always keep that notebook handy too. You never know when an idea might come forth. Be ready to take it. And even if it's not a notebook, we can use tech these days, notes apps on our phones, whatever works best for people. So
Exactly.
great tip.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, buddy, this has been a very inspirational conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and teaching us a little bit about all you know and your fascinating journey. So, again, guys, we're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today. We have a lot to learn from Buddy, and there's some really exciting stuff in the burden of evidence. So, check it on out. So, thank you for coming on. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And again, everybody, this has been the Authors on Mission podcast, where we believe every expert was once a beginner and every great story starts with somebody brave enough to ask the hard questions. So keep writing, keep reading, and keep inspiring. We'll see you next time on the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.